Alrighty, Marty, here we are. Jeremy Elwood, good morning, sir.
Good morning, Pat.
Doing well?
And good morning, anyone watching. Yeah, doing fine. Another day, another lack of a dollar.
Well, it's lovely to have you back. Thank you for joining us again today. A lot of stuff on the table today to have a chat about. In fact, a lot of stuff to have a chat about, including, I guess, the two biggest news stories of the day. At about 10 to midday, we'll be getting joined by Duncan Grieve from Spinoff, who wants to talk to us, who's going to talk to us about the merger between RNZ and TVNZ, which is something that I've, through podcasting and this, to be honest, have been talking about forever. Thinking, can't wait, look forward to it. Think it was the best move. Always thought the BBC model of radio and television was the best model. Hopefully there'll be an ad-free version of one of the two channels, and that'll also help the commercial channels because it'll drive advertising dollars to places like Prime and TV3 and others who won't be then advertising on whatever this new entity is, or at least one. Like, I'm hoping maybe if there are still two channels, maybe TVNZ is ad-free and TV2 is commercially set up or something like that. Anyway,
yeah.
And this kind of, I don't know if it impacts you, but certainly Michelle, your partner, is contributed to RNZ, works with RNZ, so I'm sure you had some interesting conversations around the table last night with that, in general.
Yeah, well, I'll be interested to hear Duncan's take on it. I've done bits and pieces for both TVNZ and 3 and RNZ over the years. So, in fact, I'm actually waiting for someone to explain to me how it's going to affect me. So I'll look forward to that.
Yeah, and also Duncan as well. Obviously, Duncan is the founder of the Spinoff.
That's right.
I mean, that is a media entity, and I think we saw with Tova O'Brien going from News Hub to this new talk radio iteration, that it's now pretty clear, even if there was a little bit of angst in the media about it, is that every media is competition for every other media. So therefore, the Spinoff is competition to the TVNZ because TVNZ now has a very well-read and popular news website. So we, not me, but everyone's in competition with everyone. So this merger will, how will Duncan feel as a producer of content and supplier of news through the Spinoff to this massive entity with probably unlimited money and reach and resource is going to affect him, if at all. So yeah.
Well, it will be interesting actually. Just while you bring that up, it'll be interesting because over the last sort of 5 or 6 years, the really hard battle lines between the networks have faded a bit. There are a lot of people who work for both TV networks at the moment, which 5 or 6 years ago just didn't happen.
Yeah.
You either work for 3 or you work for TVNZ. So I'll be interested to, and I'll ask Duncan this: is that going to come back? Is that going to be more of a hard dividing line than it currently is? But anyway, let's not preempt the conversation, I guess.
And if you want to join in, if you're with us right now and you're watching live, we are live streaming for real at 6 minutes past 11. You can. I feel like a radio host saying it. 6 minutes past 11. You can join in. You can commentate. And look, the thing I love about people who join us live is they ask us the big questions, Jeremy, like where did you get your hat?
Absolutely, yeah.
But what I do is, unfortunately, Ruby, I don't know how to answer you because who are you talking to? I mean, from a shop as me. What about you, Jeremy?
Well, actually, mine was from this is the Auckland Tuatara, the Auckland's professional baseball team, who have not played for 2 seasons because of COVID and travel restrictions. But yes, this is I bought this at a game, but you can order them through tuatara.com, I think is the website.
There you go.
Local merchandise.
Mine was through an online shop. I have no idea. I bought some caps off Amazon. Maybe it was there. So the big questions by our viewers, Jeremy, they come in.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, vital stuff. Yeah.
Now, speaking of big questions, probably the biggest news story in the country at the moment is the poll results that came out last night on TVNZ. Let's just let Jessica Much here from TVNZ explain the exact results. Most people have heard them, or at least heard of the what some are saying meteoric rise of National is. So let's give Jess kind of 30 seconds to actually explain what the headline results were last night, and let's have a chat about it.
National is now the highest ranking party, sitting on 39, a jump of 7. Labour is just behind on 37, a drop of 3. The Greens are steady on 9, ACT is on 8, down 3, and Te Pāti Māori is on 2. Now take a look at the parties that aren't in Parliament. New Zealand First is
I don't know why we're doing
2,
that, but
and the
fair enough.
Opportunities Party and New Conservative are both on 1. Let's take a look at how that translates to seats in Parliament.
No, we don't need to do that because it translates to seats in the Parliament, meaning that Māori Party in that poll have balance of power. Now, we get this all the time, 18 months out from an election. It was Winston Peters' balance of power. It's Māori Party balance of power. It's someone. I don't know the exact research, but it feels like 9 times out of 10 that doesn't actually end up being what happens on the night. But it is certainly fair to say and interesting to look at the decline is a bit of a harsh word, but the decline of Labour and the rise of National, although, as everyone will be aware, especially if you've been consuming content out of this studio, we've all been saying that there's no way the Labour Party would get a majority next election. So obviously they were going to drop. Why National has got the jump they have is a bit perplexing to me, because they've done nothing and provided nothing, but they're an opposition party. So yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think you've actually answered the question right there. I'm not surprised by this poll at all. I mean, third-term governments in New Zealand's history are the exception rather than the rule. We haven't really had that many. There has been frustration. There are a lot of people who, to quote the Prime Minister, are over COVID. And it's human nature to look for someone to blame. And for a certain number of us, that person to blame will always be the government, whoever is the government at the time. So for just to put that out of the way, I'm not surprised. But what you said is National haven't done anything because they don't have to at the moment. They can promise whatever they like. They can basically, in my opinion, this next election is Nationals to lose, and they were looking like they were giving that a red hot go for quite a while there. I mean, they really don't have to do anything at the moment. At the moment, and I'll come back to that point, because at the moment there is a bit of voter fatigue coming in. You and I agreed last time we spoke that I think it's no surprise to anyone that I am a supporter of the government, but there have been things recently that I have had to look twice at, and that I have not necessarily been all that comfortable with.
Like what? What are those?
Well,
things?
some of the communication around MIQ, for example, the response or lack thereof to the protests initially, to the anti-mandate protests, some of the communication around and the speed that we've moved through the Omicron levels, so and all of this stuff snowballs. It all builds up, and people quite often just want to look for a change. But you're right, National haven't done anything, and what they have done is just back to basics, national politics. If in doubt, promise a tax cut. Christopher Luxon hasn't necessarily done anything, but he also hasn't done anything particularly wrong. And I think people underestimate quite how divisive Judith Collins was as a politician and as a person. I mean, she really was a lover or hater politician. She had huge fans, and she just had people, national voters, who she just put off. Luxon is, and I don't mean this to sound mean, but he's a lot more bland in a way than she is. If you dig underneath the surface, there's certain parts of his, personal belief system which personally worry me. But at the moment, he's just kind of, like I say, it's back to basics national politics. It's let's talk about the economy, let's talk about roads, let's promise a tax cut, and let's see what happens. It is worth remembering, though, that we still have 18 months to go, and whether that fatigue lasts 18 months, if we suddenly, and we're not suddenly, but when we start coming out of the COVID restrictions that we're under, the vaccine mandates that we're under at the moment, I do believe there will be a lot of people who go back to looking at what this current government have done and how they've got us through this, and may swing back that way. And also, National have 18 months to start making mistakes. It's a long way to go yet.
Yeah, I also am reminded of course, Don Brash in the Ottawa speech. That was probably a year out from the election, massive bump in the polls, and didn't eventuate into anything. It was actually your wife who said to me, she came on the podcast, before the last election, and she said to me, why would we replace an exceptional woman with an average run-of-the-mill man? And I don't think that was a commentary on yay to girls and boo to boys, but in that instance, that's who she was, who her interpretation of the national leader was, whichever of the last 23 iterations we've seen of that was. And
well, I think there's a good point there, and I think the number one reason behind these pollings is simply fatigue. It's simply, we've had this government, they've been in charge, they've done so much right. But people are just tired. They're tired of, not necessarily tired of this government. They're tired of the restrictions that we're living under. And it's not just us. I mean, this is global. Exactly the same thing is happening in Canada. The swing against Trudeau's government over there, simply out of exhaustion. And like I said, we're 18 months away. So whether people get over it, whether people start feeling more positive again, I think there are some things. I think Labor are going to have to get back to actual, hard as it is. I mean, to go back to my point about what National have done, I mean, they haven't had to do anything because they're not running the country.
Sure.
Labor have a lot on their plate at the moment, but at some point they're going to have to get into election mode. They're going to have to start working out not what they're doing now, but what they can promise us for the next 3 years. And that's a gear shift that they're going to have to make. I think we're starting to see signs of that. I think some of the stuff we might be talking about later in the show is the opening salvos in that war of attrition, which is going to be for the next 18 months. But yeah, it's going to be a big gear shift going from reporting numbers and having a 1 p.m. press conference to actually going, well, this is what we've done. Great. Let's look at that. Let's celebrate that. But what can we expect for the next?
Well, I hope they don't also miss that window, because if it's like that, lies and rumors go around the world 3 times before truth gets its pants on. I mean, if you have a look at the numbers and have a look how we've lived and who we are, New Zealand has the New Zealand government primarily, but let's be fair and say through their health advice and following those, but the government still has to initiate and install those ideas, have handled this COVID crisis for the safety of its people. And you could argue about what happened with business, you could argue what happened with tourism, fine, but for the safety of its people, better than any country in the OECD.
I completely agree.
Simply be able to look at the death rate, just to look at that.
We've been one of the very few countries in the world which put health and health professionals first and foremost ahead of the economy and business leaders. And now that we're this far through, 2.5 years into this pandemic, again, it's simply frustration. I completely understand why business owners are frustrated. I mean, if I was running a hospitality business at the moment, I'd be pulling my hair out if I was still in business. But I think the thing that people need to realize is that we're not unique. That's not special. That's not something that's only happening here and only happening because of the government we have. It's happening worldwide. We're in the middle of, for our generation, or for people, completely unprecedented times. I mean, we didn't live, you and I didn't live through a world war. We didn't live through the Spanish flu epidemic. This is the defining moment in our lives, on a global scale.
For sure.
And
well, we hope.
Exactly.
We hope there's not another one in 6 years from now.
Every time we say that, something else pops up. But so no, I mean, I just simply put, I'm not surprised by this poll. But I also don't know how important it is. It's certainly not panic stations time for the Labor government at the moment.
I agree, and I mean, typically,
and back to your point. Yeah, this balance of power thing. I mean, this happens every time. There's always somebody's going to hold the balance of power, and most of the time it doesn't happen.
And I mean, it seems that most elections you look at, you kind of find that Labor sits at 40, the Greens sit at 10, National sits at 45, ACT sits at 5, and then there's a little party somewhere in between. That is typically what the election cycle is. It's returning to what it typically is. I mean, if you're in America, basically Labor and the Greens would be in the same party, and they'd be 50%, hovering around pretty much every time.
Well, we need to remember that the last election where Labor could have, in theory, governed alone, they chose not to. But that's the first time. That's the first time that was even a vague possibility since we brought MMP in. This is what we're seeing in these polls. This is back to the normal. This is how things have been since '96.
Yeah. Let's just have a look at that. Although I do you kind of inferred that the idea of, kingmakers and stuff might be a bit silly, but straight away last night, of course, Māori Party were the kingmakers, and Debbie Ngarewa Packer was on, I think it's called the AM show now this morning, and she was asked directly, if you were in that position come election day, could you work with ACT? Because I guess ACT is the party that would be hardest on paper for the Māori Party to work with, and this was her response.
Our simple, short answer is we will only work with those who are focused on treaty-centric Aotearoa, a future-focused Aotearoa addressing equality and equity.
And is that the ACT Party?
We've always said that. We've always said what our focus will be, and it'll be our people that will determine it the day after the elections, and we've always been true to that.
So you would.
So there you go. It's a very political answer. There's no there, and I guess that's a smart thing to do. But if that's genuinely what Māori Party feel, one has to question how they could ever work with an ACT party. And saying that earlier on in that interview, she did explain that treaty-centric wasn't left or right. She said it was basically Māori and centric. And so actually, she also said clearly within that, saying it's not left or right, you could infer that means she can work with left or the right. And I don't know, maybe in this world of politics where people, find several ways to skin a cat, you have the ACT Party on supply and demand, but not in Parliament, and the Māori Party in Parliament with national, there's a government.
I think her answer was, you're absolutely right. It's perfect. It's politics 101. You don't rule anything out or in. And it really it's batted the ball back into ACT's court. David Seymour now has 18 months to work out how he can justify some of his policies with the treaty. Good luck. Would be my simple answer to that. And we've seen stranger things happen. I mean, we've seen stranger bedfellows in politics over the years.
Māori Party in the past have also been quite pragmatic, and when they went with John Key's National Party, they were very much, it's better to be inside the tent where you can affect a change than outside the tent, not having to prove yourself like National at the moment because you have no ability to do anything.
Yeah, so, it's one thing to essentially rule out working with a party that's polling on 2%. Than ruling out working with the party which, at least according to this poll, is leading. I mean, again, that's pragmatic. You can take a swing at ACT. You can afford to do that. You're not ruling out an entire side of the political divide by doing that.
I wonder if Labor is now starting a conversation today around, do we support the Māori Party in their seats so they can be our partner? Or do we try and win all those Māori Party seats back, thus eliminating the Māori Party and not having to have them potentially go to national? Wonder how that conversation goes around those big tables.
Well, again, it goes back to what I was saying about that gear shift that they're going to have to. I'm sure, I'm not underestimating what goes on behind closed doors at Parliament. I'm sure this conversation is happening. But yeah, that's the shift. That's one of the shifts that Labor is going to have to go is moving from this. To bring up the titled phrase, treating us all as a team of 5 million to treating us as a team of potentially 2.5 million Labor voters. And that's a shift. That's going to be a big shift. They've done a remarkable job over the last couple of years of, I guess, to use the American term, bipartisanship. They've treated the whole country as if it's one, and going into an election. That's a seismic shift that you have to make. Is you're not treating the whole country as one. You're treating it as us and them. And it's going to be a different ball game for them.
And that's tough when you get into become a government because you've done the us and them to win, and then you have to go back to the team of 5 million because you do have to govern for everybody, even though it's from your political perspective. Absolutely,
and it's something I think the Prime Minister has done extremely well. I mean, I think. And full disclosure here, I know her personally, and it is her as a human being. I mean, that the kindness side that you see is not a political ploy. That's part of her DNA. And it's one of the reasons why, I kind of believe her when initially she said, she didn't want the leadership, because I'm not sure that the cutthroat side of it is something, certainly not whatever it is, coming up on 6 years ago. Now, I mean, she's a lot more battle hardened, and she's got a strong team around her. Yeah, I'm certainly not ruling anybody out at this point. I think the next 18 months are going to be different but interesting.
I wonder, it's a silly question to ask because it's unprovable, what the country would have looked like today under a different Labour leader or under a national government. I mean, anyone can speculate anything, but it would be interesting to think, without Jacinda Ardern as the Prime Minister, I wonder, would we be better off? Well, it'd be hard to be better off, certainly from a health point of view, because, as I say, probably best in the OECD. But if you had someone who was more business-centric than maybe health of the people-centric, and we had kept the borders open and done similar to what America's done, would we be better off financially? Although most of the reports I'm reading say that we're not doing terribly financially. I mean, lots are struggling, but we're not doing as terribly as perhaps was projected. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing when you look back at it. Like, even if COVID had never arrived, the amount of other things that this government have had to deal with, the Christchurch shootings, just as a simple example. It's been a remarkable run, and you kind of you really wouldn't begrudge anybody if they decided, oh, what the hell, we won't even campaign in the election. I just need a cup of tea and I'll lie down.
Yeah,
I don't think that's going to happen, by the way. Yeah.
Remember that first there was 4 things, wasn't there? There was White Island, there was maybe COVID kicked in that first term, there was the shootings, and she had a baby.
Yeah,
in that first 3 years. That's
not
a bad result.
That's pretty good. Yeah, it's a pretty good legacy in it already. Yeah.
Hey, let's move into where to from here, because there's some other political conversations out today that I wouldn't mind touching on. Of course, we've all been hearing a little bit about the lending rules at the moment, and this is probably a switch into the conversation about these are standalone stories of their own, but they're also, when you start looking at the government, like Prime Minister was talking about, like come April 1st, people will feel minimum wages going up. There's the for people who are eligible for it, there's the winter, whatever it's called, giving you money for winter warming sort of thing comes along.
Yep.
And that's all coming in April. So there are things coming that I think will paint Labour in a better light. One of the criticisms that they've had recently is of these home lending rules. We've all heard the stories and read the stories about people who have, had their home loans turned down because they got takeaways once a week, or, there was someone, I read one, the best one I read, best was the one that talked about the person needed to get insurance through the bank to have their home loan approved. And after they got their insurance, they were declined because of the outgoing that was the insurance of what they were doing. So, and I haven't been a sufferer of this, but the kind of finicky details I came across a little bit when I was not refinancing, but just rolling over the mortgage. My term was up.
Yep.
That they wanted me to clear my my overdue amount with the DCC, and that was $4.98 that I owed in rates. $4.98. So I had to clear that before.
I hope you were okay with that. Yeah.
No,
you should have shouted. I could have loaned you that, man.
Yeah, I went to the family trust and I got money out, and it took 30 days. No, anyway, but they've come out. There's been obviously, as soon as the noise, and to their credit, as soon as the noise started getting made in the media, they started looking at it. And the Minister of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, Dr. David Clark, has announced practical amendments to the controversial lending rules. Why don't we just tell people what the amendments are in case they haven't heard them yet? So the amendments are the removal of regular savings and investments as examples of outgoings that lenders need to inquire about. So you're allowed to save your money now without that being a negative against you. That's a pretty good thing.
Yeah.
What about clarifying that when borrowers provide detailed breakdown of future living expenses, there is no need to inquire into current living expenses from recent bank interaction. So if you got takeaways last week,
that's the takeaway rule that you're talking about.
So you got takeaways last week, but they're not going to go, why did you buy takeaways last Thursday? That's basically what that's saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
You thought that was a really important one, yeah?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think partially, I think that's one of the ones that obviously it did get a lot of media attention, and it's because it hits on two fronts. It hits on the financial front, but it also hits on privacy. It did feel, whether or not this is true or not, it felt like it was a lifestyle tax in a way.
Yeah, right.
It was kind of like a legal institution of the old millennials can't save for a home because they buy smashed avocado, fallacy. Well, that's kind of what it felt like, which is you're being judged because you get takeaways once or twice a week. Maybe, yeah. So I think it's important, probably for perception rather more than anything else. But it's. I'm glad it's gone. I'm glad it's going to be written down.
And people who wanted to get around it got around it very easily anyway, because they started. We said this yesterday. They just started to get their weekly groceries plus $100 cash on top, and then there's no record, and so it was sort of pointless because it was easily got aroundable, to make up a word, as well.
Yeah, but I think it's nice if you don't have to, lie about that stuff.
Yeah, of course. Number 3, clarifying that the requirement to obtain information in sufficient detail only relates to information provided by borrowers directly rather than relating to information from bank transaction records.
Yeah,
probably again, why did you get takeaways?
It's kind of the same thing. Yeah, it's we're going to ask you what your outgoings are, and we're not going to necessarily comb through your FPOS statements to find out whether that's true. Yeah.
And we did have people saying in the media, so being interviewed, the bank was asking why as well. They weren't just saying, I see you spent money on takeaways. There was people being asked, why did you spend that money? It's like, well, that's none of your fucking business.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right.
And the last one is providing alternative guidance and examples when it's obvious that a loan is affordable.
Yeah, that one's a little vague to me. I'm not quite sure. Does that mean that the government are going to provide alternative guidance? I guess I'm not 100% sure of that. I'm not sure when it's obvious that a loan is affordable. I mean, because that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, mortgages are essentially a risk, regardless. I mean, you may have a great income today. You may not have that in 5 years' time when your mortgage rolls over. So yeah, I'm not that one. I have to admit, is a bit of a grey area for me.
Well, we'll go knock on Dr. Clark's door later on today and ask him the question. Look,
but I think you're right. Sorry, Pat. I think you're right in that these things that are rolling out and things like this are as I said before, these are the beginnings of the sign that Labor is moving into election mode. These are the little things that are going to start. They're non-COVID related. They're all about day-to-day living. COVID's dominated the headlines, obviously, and as it should. But the housing crisis hasn't gone away. It is still, for a certain number of people, particularly a certain age bracket, it is still the number one stressor and the number one thing that they are. This is an example of what I was saying before, this is what are we going to get in the next 3 years? What are you offering us that is actually going to change my life? And National's response to that has been, surprise, surprise, we're going to make some tax cuts. Yeah.
And those tax, I love the idea of talking about tax cuts, because you hear a political party going, God, this is National. God, cost of living terrible. Labor government terrible. House prices up $400,000. Everything's terrible. You guys need more money. Here's $8 a week.
Exactly.
And it's like, actually, what's meaningful change? Like, if you're going to do it, what's meaningful change for cost of living? And I think that probably leads us beautifully into the next sort of part of the story, which is sort of a continuation, which is one of the examples of cost of living. Although I should have a look again. We did this yesterday, Jeremy, because you fellas in Auckland are suffering $3 a litre for petrol.
$3. Well, I'm in a position. My car takes premium gas.
Very good.
Well, yeah, but 98 petrol is $3.48 a litre now, which is
$3.48. Fuck me.
To be honest with you, I have not. One of the beautiful things about basically being in a self-imposed lockdown is I think I've filled up my car with petrol maybe 3 times in the last 2.5 years. But funny, I've heard all of this stuff about petrol prices, and it was only yesterday when I realized I'm actually going to have to go fill up today, and I properly looked at it and went $3.48. Wow. I got a 50-litre tank in my car. It used to cost me about $110.
$175.
I'll find out about an hour after we finish this interview. I'm bracing for it.
So this is not to show off or anything, people. So this is a little app that tells you price tags. That's the price in Dunedin at the moment, $2.69.
that
So
for 91 or 98? Just out of curiosity.
that's 91, I think.
Yeah.
That's what I look up.
Because I think 91, it's still cheaper. 91 is still over $3 a litre up here.
There you go. There's 98 at the same petrol station. It says
Oh, well,
281.
there you go. Yeah, okay. So 75
So
cents basically.
we're confused. Actually, maybe we should find that out, George. Maybe we should go and find out why it's cheaper here. So, but the thing I'm going to do today is I'm going to fill up as well, because I just have this feeling that maybe on Monday it'll be $3 a litre. So
there's a couple of reasons. One of which, of course, is the regional fuel tax that we have up here, which is already becoming a key issue in our mayoral elections. I mean, our candidates for mayor who have announced it's one of the first things that they've taken a side on is regional fuel tax. You know, some are planning to scrap it, some are planning to keep it.
is that 10 cents a litre?
I don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure.
But look, we could go into now, and the story that you've got here up beside us is the cost of living, how other countries are combating soaring fuel prices. And one of the things that's happening, retail gasoline and diesel prices soared to record highs in many countries across the world this week, prompting governments from Brazil to France to consider pumping up subsidies or trimming taxes to shield consumers from financial strain. Now, at the moment, in fact, there was a TVNZ story last night. They broke down what the cost of fuel was, and it went 40% was the cost of the fuel, right? 45% was taxes and levies, and about 15% was, profit and everything else that comes in for the actual business. I remember when I worked at a petrol station, they used to talk about 6% profits, and maybe that 6% hasn't changed. But obviously, doing my maths and not looking off to the side to my calculator at all, 45% on a $3 litre of fuel is $1.35 a litre. If you're paying $3 a litre, about $1.35 means for $3.50, it's going to be $1.50 is in taxes and levies. Now, there is an obvious kind of question here of how much tax do we need to pay on that? We are a country that since COVID, like the rest of the world, tax revenue has been down. So we can't bankrupt our country by paying no tax. But the government, talking about getting into election mode, this is where the story follows on, has $1.35 a litre at the moment that they can play with to make cost of living. Like if they said to New Zealand for the next 12 months, like obviously keeping their powder dry, maybe doing it 3 months out from the election, for the next 12 months, we're going to cut taxes and levies on fuel by half, then your $3 a litre goes down to a $2.25 straight away. And that's a significant difference. Now, whether they could do that, whether that's financially viable to do that, to take that money out of the coffers, I don't know. But there's wiggle room. There's ways of getting into election mode, as you're saying, and maybe that's one of them.
There's a little bit of a rock and a hard place there as well, though, which is a lot of the criticism of National's proposed tax cuts, quite rightly, is the fact that you just have to flick on the news any day at the moment, and you'll see how underfunded our health department is, how our schools and teachers are struggling, how our emergency services are underfunded, and of course, so much of that gets paid for through tax. Yeah. So Labor's in a little bit of a tricky position here, where on the one side they want to argue against national tax cuts, but then if they turned around and essentially offered a tax cut by removing some of the subsidies, the tariffs on petrol, there's a case you could argue that there's a hypocrisy there. Practically, it would be a very efficient thing. I mean, it would really be one of the few things you could do immediately that would help people out, making it a temporary thing as well. Unfortunately, I mean, the price of oil is just something which is, I mean, it's not going to get better with everything that's happening around the world, with the situation in Ukraine, with the US just saying that they're going to ban Russian oil imports. I mean, the price is just going to keep going up. So, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you in principle. I mean, I think it would be a huge vote getter. And it was, I mean, it really would. And it would really hit people in the pockets in a positive way, Yeah. Your average Joe or Joanna who's driving to work, or, there's an immediate weekly cut, and it's going to be more than that $8 a week that you're going to get under National's proposed taxes. Politically, it's a difficult one. It's a tricky one where, quite rightfully, you're going to be arguing going into this election that we need the tax money to improve things. I mean, the health system is the obvious example, where you just see we've dodged the bullet so well thanks to good governance that our health system hasn't been overrun. But it doesn't take a genius to look at it and go, we're this far, it's close.
It does raise two more questions for me as well, though, this whole tax on fuel. The first is, I talk to people about getting an electric vehicle. Now that the electric vehicles can easily go kind of 300, 400, 500 kilometers on a charge. Like I live in Dunedin, Queenstown's about 300 k's away. And my high rolling lifestyle, Jeremy, I'm up there every other day. But for a while, electric cars were 200k sort of thing, and that was problematic. But now they're basically all new electric car. I mean, 300k range would be on the low end now. Getting up to 600k on some of them. Now that that's possible, one of the things the government could do, talking about subsidies as opposed to reducing taxes, is find a way for me to get into an electric vehicle. I will do it. Like I'll do it.
I'm with you.
I mean, one of the things I love about watching what happens in America and Tesla is they basically have schemes, because Tesla is based there, where it can cost them like $100 a week to own a brand new Tesla. And I've seen people on YouTube do the video clips where they sell their car, they buy a Tesla, the offset from the fuel they're paying actually kind of pays for the Tesla. And there's ways that it can be done. And the second thing is, just before you jump in, is it's completely a different point, but we're all so pro-Ukraine at the moment for obvious reasons, and we're supporting Ukraine, and we're all against what's happening in Russia. The price at the pump is one of the things that comes with our support. So you can't be fuck off Russia, we're 100% on board for Ukraine, and then still whinge about the price at the pump. Well, you can if you want, but the reason for the price at the pump is because obviously people are now not buying oil out of Russia. Price has gone through the roof, and it's going to happen. So I think people should remember, me included, that when I go fill up this afternoon, that one of the reasons the price is this high is because of what literally Vladimir Putin is doing. So rather than lay the blame at Jacinda's feet, why don't you lay it at Putin's feet and then move forward?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Well, it's fascinating, isn't it, that oil is, our reliance on fossil fuels is so many things. I mean, yes, it's an economic issue. Yes, it's a climate issue. It's a greenhouse gas issue. But fundamentally, it's a political issue. If we manage to cut worldwide, when I say we, I mean the global we, to cut our reliance on oil, the balance of power in so many parts of the world would shift overnight. The power that certain parts of the UAE have, the UAE, but certain nations in the Middle East, the power Russia has through Europe, the reason for invading Ukraine in the first place, all of that would shift. And we've been very slow to do that. I mean, there's a lot of politics behind that. I'm with you. I mean, I bought a new for me car a few years ago. If I could have been able to afford an electric car or a hybrid at the time, I would have bought one. But they were still, an extra $20,000 on top of what I was prepared to spend. Hopefully that changes, and the infrastructure has to come with it. You need more charging stations, particularly in outside of the major cities or towns. Hopefully there's I agree. I think a subsidy on that would be great. It might not affect everybody. I don't think it's going to make a huge difference for people who make a low income at the moment, because a second-hand petrol car is still going to be more affordable than a new electric car. But it might make enough of a difference that it just helps ease our demand, because demand is what drives it. You're absolutely right. You can have all the best intentions and all the best politics in the world, but when we still have to have petrol in a car to get to work, you're going to have to pay those prices. And it's not this government's fault that the price has gone up. It's, oil companies and the geopolitical world that we live in.
Well, especially because what they could do, I guess, here's an idea. Like, so when fuel was $2 a litre, 45% of that is going to be 90 cents. What if they cap their tax at 90 cents? Because now that it's 45 cents a litre, tax is $1.35. I think could do that.
That's a much more practical way of doing it. I agree. Possibly the horse is bolted on that one, but yes, that would have made a lot of sense, as opposed to having a sliding scale. I mean, I think you could do the same, not just with petrol, but I mean, to widen the argument, you could do the same thing with healthy food. People talk about removing the GST. Well, maybe you don't remove the GST, but maybe you cap the amount. Maybe if you're not going to charge more than, I don't know what it is, 30 cents on a bunch of bananas. But yeah, you could put a cap in there, because then you also know, you know what your income's going to be. It's not going to change if the price suddenly, for some reason, the price of oil falls through the floor and people are paying $1 a litre. Well, maybe 90 cents of that is still taxed. Fine.
Wow.
That
Yeah.
doesn't make any mathematical sense. But I'm a comedian, not a mathematician.
Look, what we'll do now, I reckon, Jeremy, is we're going to jump to a story. We've got Duncan Grieve coming to join us in about 8 minutes.
Right.
But because I want to give Duncan the full 10 minutes to chat to, why don't we actually have a chat now about what we're going to talk to Duncan about? Because I've got some video and stuff to play. And then we can actually jump to another story in between. But that means we've got the video out from Chris Fafoy, because it's about a 2-minute clip with the announcement of the merger yesterday. And then when Duncan comes on, we've done our background, and we can just sit back and have a coffee and let him talk for 10 minutes about why this is a good and or bad thing.
Right.
So yesterday it was announced by Chris Fafoy, I think at the New Zealand School of Broadcasting, that TVNZ and RNZ are definitely going to merger, which I think is fantastic. I've been a supporter of this for a long time. I think the BBC model is absolutely where we'd want to go ultimately. And I think what we're going to do is just give you 2 minutes of his chat here, where he basically lays out why and what. He talks about a group of individuals and government agencies doing research for a couple of years on what they should do, and they came to the conclusion that it should move forward, and that's where we pick up his conversation.
Their recommendation was to create a modern public media entity that will better meet the needs of New Zealand audiences and address the challenges of technology change, global competition for audiences, and revenue. They also stressed the importance of protecting and future-proofing the trust and strength that public media has built up over decades, and telling the range of New Zealand stories that reflect our unique corner of the world. As I said earlier, when referring to audience and platform changes, this challenge is already well and truly upon us. So the case for change is there, and public media must be a presence in the new and developing world of media consumption, production, and delivery. So, Cabinet has decided to create that new single public media entity. It will ensure that New Zealanders continue to have access to reliable, trusted, independent information, and local content sits at the heart of the decision to create it. Whether it be COVID, national emergencies, or Olympic Games, the last few years have shown how important a strong media environment is to reflect New Zealanders' stories, their dreams and aspirations, and it is important we support public media to flourish. A public media entity which is resilient, sustainable, and has the wherewithal to deliver independent, trusted information is absolutely key to that. As I've said, we need public media which is responsive to current challenges of change and can flourish. RNZ and TVNZ are each trying to adjust to the challenges, but our current public media system and setup and the legislation that it's based on does limit their focus to radio and television. The public media is extremely important to New Zealanders, providing them with high quality, independent, timely and relevant media content. And this is why the government will create a new organisation by the middle of next year, building on the best of RNZ and TVNZ to future-proof public media for New Zealanders for decades to come.
There you go. There's pretty much the announcement. So, yeah, a new entity. I'm really, really, really hoping it's the NZBC, because there's just something about the New Zealand Broadcasting Corporation that sounds fantastic to me. But a new entity is coming. Yeah, we've got Duncan Grieve joining us. He's not due yet, but I didn't want to kind of spend 2 minutes of the time chatting with him, playing that video. But I wanted to get it out there as to what is happening. I think we can hold our comments till we actually get Duncan in a few minutes, Jeremy, if you're down for that.
Yeah.
And whilst we're doing that, let's have a quick chat about Ukraine. A quick chat, just that little thing in Ukraine.
Sure, let's,
One of the things that's happening at the moment, we all know about what's happening with business supporting Ukraine by temporarily pulling out of Russia. I found this story to be particularly interesting overnight. Netflix has also announced they're suspending their streaming platform in Russia. One of the concerns about some content providers doing this is that's also then keeping content that may help the Russian people, because they're obviously getting a lot of disinformation at the moment from them. So what Netflix has done is there's then gone and put the documentary that they were just talking about, which is now playing in the background. They put it on YouTube for free. So Netflix has gone, you're not going to have our content, but you can have, especially this documentary, which is a few years old. It's Winter on Fire, Ukraine's Fight for Freedom. They've put it up there so people can also go and get, people of Russia and primarily, but people in general can go and get some non-disinformation information about what's happening there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's interesting, this one. It's the fact that businesses are pulling out en masse is really kind of interesting. There's a couple of things. I mean, a lot of this started for a professor at Yale University put together a spreadsheet of companies who were still operating in Russia and made it public. So there was immediately a pressure there. That was a list you did not want to be on. But certainly in the US, the kind of interesting thing about the response to the Ukraine is how bipartisan, how truly bipartisan it has been. A recent poll, I was just looking at the numbers, a recent poll found 86% of Americans saw the invasion of Ukraine as unjustified, and that's on both sides of the political divide. This has not become a Republican-Democrat issue, which means for these businesses, many of whom are US-based, obviously, including Netflix, it's an absolute no-brainer decision, which is great. I mean, it's incredible that, they can look at this and go, the PR is going to cancel out the lack of profit. I mean, when McDonald's closes its restaurants, when companies like Coke, who were still selling products, I'm not sure if they still are, but they were an outlier there. And the information side of things, I mean, the fact that Netflix have done this is, it's really interesting. I mean, we are living in an information age, and there's reports that Russian television is portraying an entirely different view of this invasion. You're not allowed to say the word war on Russian TV. So if companies like Netflix can help fight against that by making this stuff really available on a platform like YouTube, which the Russian government, in many ways, is kind of powerless to control. I mean, you can block social media, but something like YouTube, I mean, it's thankfully, I mean, we're broadcasting in Russia at the moment if someone decided to tune in.
Hi.
Yeah, hello, I hope you are. So I mean, I think it's great. And it will be temporary, of course, when this situation calms down, if it does, fingers crossed, it'll go back to business as usual because profits. But what I am impressed about is that this is just, not only is it the right thing to do, but the level of support for it around the world has made it the economically right thing to do. But it's the right business decision. And it's not often that those two things go hand in hand.
And that just brings us back to what we can do as individuals. Economically, we're suffering at the pump, and that's part of the support of what's happening in Ukraine. But let's leave that right there now, because it is 10 to midday, and we are going to welcome into the show from the spin-off Duncan Grieve. Duncan, good morning.
Kia ora. Great to be
Duncan,
here.
how are you?
That is the
good,
best backup set that we've had so far. I think you win for backdrop of the week.
Thank you. I've been working my garage basically since Omicron arrived, and I'm loving it, to be honest.
Yeah. I can see you don't live in Dunedin because you've got your garage door up. If you're in Dunedin, you have it down with some kind of heater on.
Yeah, that's it's. I think it's going to be like the right climate for about 3 months total across the year, but I'm in the middle of it, so it's all good.
Very good. Hey, thank you for joining us. We've asked you to come on today to talk about the TVNZ RNZ merger. Just so you know, before you came on, we played a 2-minute clip from Minister Fafoy, kind of explaining what he was going to do. We wanted to play that before you came on to give us the full kind of 10 minutes to chat about good, bad, and different for what this. Your article today off the spin-off TVNZ and RNZ to merge and a not-for-profit giant likely to dominate New Zealand media. Why don't you just give us your initial thoughts about the merger?
Sure. I mean, I think that in some ways, headlines do what the headlines do, which is kind of try and grab a nugget of what the thing is, what we're trying to get at, but obviously can't tell the whole of it. So, I think that the best case scenario in some ways, what they're aspiring to do, if successful, will inevitably do that. Like, it's taking TVNZ and RNZ as existing entities, which have nearly $400 million in revenues between them, pushing them together. And they've made multiple references to the budget, which will no doubt bring more resource for them, and they're trying to do what those brands do for radio and television, do it in the online space, and that's just a much harder place to make money. So when you have that much resource plus more, and you remove the profit imperative, they're going to be a really formidable foe, assuming that they get the talent side right. And there's a lot of complexity to that, and the establishment board, the makeup of that will be quite instructive. But it is quite a momentous day, even if on the surface of it, the fact that they'll continue as they are for the time being means that there isn't a tangible thing just yet.
You say it's a momentous day. Is it something that you personally think is good or bad? Like for a long time, I've been talking about, the BBC model, how they've got television and they've got radio. And I quite like that idea. I like the idea of potentially having one of the channels being non-commercial and one being commercial. It seems to be something as a consumer that I quite like the vibe and feel of. What about you personally? Do you think it's a good or a bad idea?
I mean, as with most things, it comes down to execution. I think there is the how you resolve the commercial and non-commercial online will be really interesting, right? Like it's very easy to manage in the kind of the legacy media world, but online, picking what is and isn't going to be non-commercial is much more difficult. And I think that and weighting the level of commercial, because the most extreme end is probably the Herald and Stuff style of online, where it's pop-ups and autoplay and lots of interruptive advertising, which is what you on some level need to do to make that work, versus there's a sort of a more minimal ad load. And I've always been struck, and probably I get too wound up about this, but I feel like there's a real inequity in that with RNZ, which has probably got one of the oldest audiences in the country, and that's not really necessarily a critique, it's been around a long time, and that audience, it's a great product, but it is designed for a specific audience. They get a beautiful commercial-free thing for them, and everyone below that get very little public media spend at all, and what they do get is saturated in ads, and that just doesn't feel fair. So I don't know how that they'll resolve that with this.
Two things. Firstly, I'm not sure if you meant to use the phrase, but you referred to this new entity as being a formidable foe. I mean, how is this going to affect people like the Spinoff, for example, but also, I mean, the other major player, people like Discovery and MediaWorks within the, because on one side, you could say this is an influx of money into this national broadcaster. But on the flip side, and I heard a national spokeswoman say this today, is you may suddenly shift all this advertising money over to someone like Discovery, for example, because they won't be able to spend it on TVNZ. And I mean, so where does it sit in balance of competition, in your view?
I mean, again, a lot of this comes down to sort of system design, but there is a real and quite grave threat that this could pose, and that what do you compete for in media? You compete for audience, you compete for commercial income, and you compete for talent, and all of those things are really hard online. I think on some level, while the old engines of legacy media are still running, we have a bit of a false sense of the robustness of our media, and that TVNZ On Demand has a bunch of great shows, including local shows. The Herald has a bunch of great journalism. Stuff has a bunch of great journalism. The fundamentals of what are powering that financially are still newspapers and television advertising. You remove that, and the whole thing is quite different. So the and when you're in that situation, you've got a not-for-profit that gets a huge chunk of government money, and we're talking, like legacy media has been stickier than anyone thought. They were talking about shutting down the print Sydney Morning Herald, 10 years, in 2013, 14, and that proved to be vastly premature. But at some point these things do, sunset, and that could be 5 years away, 10 years away. But this is about imagining that future, and so there is a world where that the government basically comes to dominate the media, both from a journalism and a more sort of entertainment or cultural side in a way that would, I think, genuinely be disquieting to people. What they've mentioned in this is that they want to collaborate and partner with private sector media, and I guess that is the sort of key hope, is that they actually partner with, commission, fund elements of the private sector media to maintain that plurality and to get a more diverse sort of product range for this new entity. That is probably the only way that it doesn't have a corrosive effect on the relationship between the state media and private sector media.
I mean, what would you hope is that it's because it's not competition, because if they're a model that doesn't need to provide profit because they're a public entity, that means other media sources to it aren't necessarily competition, and that at least for revenue. So they should be able to support. They should be able to support and work with other groups as well.
But I don't think they're certainly not signaling that, right? They're saying that this is going to have commercial and non-commercial elements. So, if you're Discovery sales team, or the spin-off sales team for that matter, that means that you're going to a meeting where someone can price 20% below you for the same thing effectively,
right,
because they don't have to make a margin. Notwithstanding the fact that you also have the fact of being government on your side. Like, my feeling is, and I've issued OIAs to find this out, and they're refusing to say where they've made this spend, but there was $87 million spent on the COVID-19 campaign. Obviously, really important work had to happen, but where that money was spent is really interesting, I think, and important to know. How much of it went to Facebook? How much of it went to YouTube? How much of it went to TVNZ? And they're refusing to say, which I think is, I've appealed to the Ombudsman. I'm remain very curious about that. But fundamentally, like, based on what the sort of purely anecdotal consuming different media as I do in a quite a hyperactive way, there was a lot of this stuff on TVNZ. It felt like more there than almost anywhere else. And government is an increasingly large player in the communications business already. So there's a sort of a second order consequence to this, where the government is likely to shop at the government's store, if you take my meaning.
I got a slightly more lighthearted question. Well, in a way, but it's a serious question as well. Is you and I, Duncan? I mean, we've both worked at TVNZ and at RNZ. We've both been in both of those buildings. The cultures are very different. I mean, just the vibe when you walk into either of those buildings. I mean, how do you see those two cultures coming together as one entity?
I mean, no, look, I think that's actually a great question, and it's both light-hearted and deadly serious, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean it, yeah.
Because they don't naturally merge. The commercial was split off from RNZ when it sold ZB, 25 plus years ago. TVNZ has had a commercial mandate for longer than that again, and the world of hunting what you eat versus it just being handed to you once a year, it creates an entirely different dynamic and imperative, and there's good and bad in it. Like, I think both of them have fantastic and really interesting cultures, but they aren't naturally compatible. One will likely devour the other. So the merging of them has the potential for, like you're doing an arm transplant, like the body might reject this new limb, and so I think whether who is chosen to lead it, I think both Paul Thompson and Simon Power, the incoming TVNZ CEO, are keen on it. Whether they can both sort of coexist, that doesn't tend to happen in these situations, will be really instructive about which culture eats the other. I mean, just on pure scale, TVNZ obviously is the more likely there, but certainly I think the government has much more of a fondness for RNZ. I mean, this really came out of the RNZ Plus idea, which was Claire Curran's in the 2017 manifesto.
They've announced this merger to happen in the middle of next year. Duncan, do you think any part of this is going to be a positive leading up to the next election? And I also thought, should National win the next election, could that impact this at all?
I think, if National is just playing this politically, like you game that out, I think using this as an example of government largesse of solving a problem that fundamentally I don't think anyone is asking them to solve. Like there isn't a large constituency of people saying, I like TVNZ and RNZ, one or the other, and I think they should be put together. That is not, Paul Thompson was asked that by Guy on Morning Report today, and whether an audience member has ever said that to him, and the answer was no. So I think there isn't a particular political constituency for this. That doesn't mean it isn't something that should happen. That's a sort of a different question. But fundamentally, like this is frameable as a bad thing. It might even be something that is is hard to do and fundamentally doesn't actually make sense. Like that is all sort of yet to be written. But I think there's a chance that National looks hard at this and goes, actually, we will make this one of the things that we attack the government on, and we make one of our campaign promises not to mess with your beloved TVNZ or RNZ, and we'll undo it. And so, while it has been announced and the wheels are in motion, this is actually something that is, for the time being, relatively easily unwound.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, Duncan, thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate your insights. Duncan Grieve from the Spinoff. It's really good to have your thoughts around that. And congratulations on the Spinoff. Don't think I've ever said this to you, because actually you're looking at the models that are happening around the country of like independent media and media outside that sort of traditional media that's been around for 40 years. And I don't think anyone does it as good as you guys. So well done on that. And thanks for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, no, thanks so much for having me on. And, this is absolutely an example of the kind of innovation that the media desperately needs. And, I appreciate your kind words.
All right. Thank you, dude. All the best.
Cool. Cheers.
Duncan Grieve, Jeremy Elwood, Georgie Elliott.
So I see you're just gonna jump out after the mutual backslapping between you and Duncan. Well done. That's great. Great time to finish.
Hey, really quickly, there's been lots of people messaging us today, and I'm sorry we haven't got to your conversations. It's that me and Jeremy go way back. We did our first podcast, I think it was 2008, Jeremy, and we can talk the chrome off a tow bar. Is that what they say? Let's just have a couple of these comments real quick. Improval, we're talking about the lending issues. When I was at the bank, we looked at cash withdrawals as we didn't want to be simply seen as an expense. Also, see if lots of withdrawals from ATM at a pub was not seen as well, e.g. drinking and gambling. Talking about the cars, Jeremy, Crazy Old World says, I have a wee Toyota Hybrid, 800 kilometers on about 31 to 32 liters, about $90 to fill on current prices. And then Emperorvale says, GST, we were talking about dropping taxes and stuff. GST is charged on excise fees, not on tax, though. Government hasn't yet announced what to do with EV rebate due to expire 31st of March, and delay on intro of road user charges for EV that funds lots of roads. So road user charges, same as if you drive a diesel as well, I guess.
Well, that's an interesting one. That's the timing of that 31st of March. I mean, that's another one of those things that we're going to start hearing about from the 1st of April, right? It'll be
yeah. George, you've been kind of in the background pushing buttons and doing stuff today. Is there anything you want to add in from the conversations?
No, I think I might get a scooter with a motor in it. It's kind of cool, But if I got a car, I'm such a motorhead that would need a motor in it. I like Jeremy. I love that Jeremy was talking about the energy element of the war in Ukraine, right? And I mean the wars of the last 20 years, right? And their relationship with energy is a very, very important part that I think is sometimes missed a little bit here, and hopefully we can talk more about in the future.
Yeah. You ready for a nap, George? Is it nap time?
I'm ready for the weekend. Yeah.
I'm ready for a nap too. Yeah, people, this is a lot of work to put this stuff together. So George, I appreciate your time, and thank you very much for doing what you do in the background. Yeah, and Jeremy, yourself there, and other people who have come on board to co-host and contribute through the week. We genuinely appreciate that. If people don't know what we do, look out this weekend for a bit of a trailer. I'm going to make a trailer this weekend showing the first couple of weeks of doing this show, including a whole bunch of stuff like the contributors and guests and co-hosts and stuff we've had on. So that'll be coming up this weekend if you want to have a look on our YouTube channel, which is scrolling down the bottom. It'll be there. It'll be on my Twitter feed, and it'll be around. So thanks to you, Jeremy, to you, George, to everyone who's been involved so far. It's the end of our second week. And I guess apart from anything else, we will catch up with everybody next Monday from 11 o'clock, should we decide to come back, George, and do this all again. All right, team, all the best. Thanks for watching. Thanks for contributing. We'll catch you next time.